Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Let's Get Vaccinated on HeadMed Chats, hosted with our partners at March for Science. Today, we're celebrating Juneteenth and Pride Month with a chat on queer allyship and collective liberation. I'm Dr. Nisi Hudson. I'm the chair and science director of Hood Medicine Initiative. I'm a computational biologist with a BS in biology from MIT and a PhD from the University of Louisville. And I currently work in health equity research and public health communications. And I direct the research division and media group at Hood Medicine. Hood Medicine is an initiative as a nonprofit collective of scientists, physicians, hackers, and assorted geeks focused on health equity and reducing the spread of mis and disinformation. And our HoodMed Chats podcast connects health experts and activists to bring real talk and mad science to our communities. Today, we have guests from our partners at Black Mental Health Village, co-founders Geoffrey Hervey and Benaya Sasayas. So welcome, you guys. It's good to have you. Geoffrey, aka Sinclair, is a community organizer, mental health professional, and professional drag artist. They have a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from Vanderbilt University and are currently pursuing a PsyD at George Washington University. As Sinclair, they have performed in Nashville in front of crowds of thousands and created the Lip Sync Legend Tournament to benefit local community mental health organizations. And Benny is a community educator, small business owner, and organizer in Nashville, Tennessee. He has a BA in neuroscience from Amherst College and is co-founder of the Black Mental Health Village. He's interested in decolonizing mental health through the use of data, community-based interventions, and psychedelic psychotherapy. Thank you guys both for joining us today. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you. I love being on. Yeah, I love being here.
And one thing I wanted to add too to the list of accolades was Geoffrey recently published, right? So shout out to Geoffrey for that as well.
Oh, that's awesome! Congrats. What was your paper on?
So I was I did some data coding for a larger project that actually was based in Tennessee, basically looking at firsthand accounts of institutional betrayals and injustices in rural Tennessee.
Nice. I want to see it. Send me the link. I want to read it.
Absolutely.
As you guys all know, today's show is about Juneteenth and a celebration of freedom. And we wanted to talk about the idea of collective liberation and what that looks like for our communities, especially as we navigate this era with, a renewed rise of anti-Blackness and fascism, and in particular how it impacts our queer brothers and sisters who are ostensibly fighting for the same freedom from oppression as we all are. I'm reminded of an adage that Maya Angelou and Fannie Lou Hamer are credited as saying, which is no one of us can be free until everybody is free. But it's actually originally a quote and a whole word from the late 19th century poet Emma Lazarus, who wrote the new Colossus sonnet that's inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. And at the time she was advocating, among her own, settled, prosperous Jewish middle-class community for acceptance and tolerance of new Jewish immigrants who were being persecuted and denigrated as they arrived in America to flee anti-Semitic violence. And I think even that's a good tie-in and callback because we're seeing a huge rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric and propaganda as well, along with everything else. But regardless of who said it first, they each spoke in the spirit of unity and communal action against oppression, both from within our community and from without as well. So Geoffrey, I wanted to start with you and kind of see how that resonates with you, especially now that we're seeing sort of bigoted propaganda kind of permeate our spaces and these concerted efforts by lawmakers everywhere really to essentially institute medical apartheid on some LGBTQ patient populations.
It resonates quite deeply, and I'm happy to be here to talk about it. I, like many people in the world, I exist at the intersection of so many different things, right? There are all sorts of identities and positionalities that make up who we are and what we bring to the table and how we navigate the world. I think to your question and the current moment that we're in right now, I think that there's been a lot of very vile and harmful, dangerous legislation and rhetoric directed towards LGBTQ plus people. And that only gets even more complex when you factor in the realities of race, the realities of disability, the realities of immigration and migrant status. I think that what I'm really sorting through and really grappling with, because, even as I'm talking about this, like, these are things that directly affect me, right? Like, one thing that I really want to make clear today is, like, I'm a real person. These things that we talk about in abstraction, sometimes they affect real, tangible people, like myself, like my family, like my friends, like my community. And it's very, very desolate to live in existence in a society that truly does not care about you at best, or at worst, actively wants to see you exterminated.
Yeah. Yeah. We've seen in places like Florida and elsewhere, Republicans sort of targeting Black churches in particular to get support from voters on their policies like Don't Say Gay and trans healthcare bans, really sort of playing on our own intra-community prejudices. And like, basically, in the end, do you think this sort of conspiring with those that mean us no good will help Black communities? And I mean, both existentially and politically.
No, and it never has. And, I apologize if I'm coming off a bit too incendiary here, but there's so much. Listen, I'm a chronic people pleaser and a therapist, so I'm always monitoring my tone. But the reality is there's just so much that's wrapped up in this, right? There's like the conservative manipulations. How often do conservatives try to reach out to the people that they're actively trying to harm by way of pointing the ire and the scapegoat of someone else? Secondly, there's this really ridiculous trope that I think both people within our community and outside of it sort of perpetuate, this idea that Black people are more homophobic or queer negative than any other group. To be clear, just like all other axes of oppression, homophobia and transphobia exist everywhere. They are universal to the human experience. It's not exclusive to Black people. And queer Black people are almost always left out of that conversation. I think what the reality is just like how there are white conservatives or Latin conservatives or Asian conservatives, there are Black people that tend to have conservative thought, and that can often be to the detriment of queer people or poor people or women or all numbers of people. I think that, to really get at the question that you asked, sometimes faith can be a bastion or at the very least a vehicle for conservatism. And the Black church is such a strong cornerstone of our community, even for those of us that aren't particularly religious. The institution of the church still resonates quite deeply within the African American experience. It's smart of Republicans to try to, sink their nails into the Black churches, but I think that it's very unwise for those of us within our community to hold hands with massa in that sense.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. I mean, we're seeing, these same kinds of political moves across like abortion bans and these book bans now. Yes, we're burning books again. And it's just, it's unfortunate because a lot of the laws are setting some really crazy precedents right now. Benny, what do you think about the meaning of collective liberation and how could we possibly achieve it when we undermine groups within our own communities based on the same learned intolerance of our collective oppressors? Like, what does that look like for us? And are most of us even thinking about collective liberation and in an equitable sense when we think about marginalized populations within the Black community?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think we are looking at it in the equitable sense. I think we really don't understand, or I don't think there's a great enough understanding of the tools of white supremacy. The fact that, you know, divide and conquer is one of the biggest tools of white supremacy that's been used to harm us, you know, throughout time. And if we understood that, and if we understood that, you know, in order for my needs to be met, I also had to advocate for other people who are being oppressed by the same systems that are causing, you know, economic, that are causing, you know, healthcare injustices, then we would actually see, you know, that we have the same targets that we have to, you know, address. But right now, we're just unable to see that, and that's a lot of the issue. And then even outside of, you know, the systemic forces, I think the biggest issue is there's so much internalized white supremacy and internalized hatred that we are so busy destroying ourselves that, you know, they don't even need to actively take a role in playing a part in dismantling our communities. And that's what we're seeing, right? When churches are becoming the faces for these kinds of, you know, black churches are being used for these kinds of policies. They're really trying to pit us against each other. And for us to really address that, we have to understand that, you know, we all have to speak out for each other. We have to understand that, you know, ultimately, all of our issues are interconnected, right? And that is the biggest struggle, but one of the most important things that I think needs to happen for us to be able to advocate for each other moving forward, and know that, like, you know, we all have to be on board. Otherwise, this divide and conquer thing, like, we're doing the work of white supremacy. That's really what I see.
Yeah, it's more unpaid labor, trust me. Geoffrey,
and the irony,
so drag is often seen. Go ahead.
I was going to say the irony in terms of the Juneteenth celebration that we're having now is Texas is unrolling all of the DEI offices, right?
Yeah.
And Texas is the reason why we even have Juneteenth in the first place. And so, you know, to me, like, these are signs that even the, you know, national holiday, the Juneteenth becoming a national holiday, that's very symbolic at this point, right? There's no material conditions that are being improved for our communities. Matter of fact, there are a lot of people who don't even know that today is a holiday and they should be getting paid time and a half, or they should be, you know, they should have time off, right? And that in itself is ironic, because that's what Juneteenth was about, people not even knowing about emancipation. So, you know, this is the issues that are created when, one, history is banned, when, two, we're changing, you know, the rhetoric, and we're also pitting, you know, each other against one another. So it's a very dangerous precedent that we're being set, but we really have to be aware of what's going on and try to advocate for one another.
Geoffrey, so drag is often seen as a form of expression and empowerment for many in the LGBTQ community. How has, or how will these bans on drag that we're seeing pop up in red states sort of impact the way people in the community view their own identities and self-expression?
Thank you for asking that question, because again, this is something that's very near and dear to me as a queer person and as a drag entertainer. I'm going to start with like the personal and the obvious, and then I'll work my way out to another area that people might not be thinking of. But I think first and foremost, drag as an art form is about gender. And when you put gender in jeopardy, you are putting people's whole senses of self and being in jeopardy. These bans on drag are rooted in very studied and history rhetoric that's been leveraged against queer people or gender variant people being predators or groomers. That's sort of the real foundation of like all of these legislations, right? The idea that it's too salacious or it's not appropriate or that it's somehow corrupting people. That's the undercurring idea. That rhetoric is incredibly toxic and harmful to queer people, both in terms of our own safety, as we are now seeing conservatives, cowardly lot, showing up and attacking people at queer events, even during Pride Month. Drag artists and entertainers are not being made to feel safe just going to work. And I also think that one element in all of this that does need to be said that doesn't really get articulated, I think, in the right way as much, is that while these bans are pro forma related to drag and the actual enforcement of this, the ways that they're being written in the law, anyone that's dressing or presenting out of their gender marker that is assigned will be in jeopardy. So what that really will look like is that trans people, people that don't pass, or maybe even cis people who are a little genderqueer or don't present in their traditional gender, they are also in jeopardy of how this ban might be enforced. We can't, as we know, rely on law enforcement to handle these judiciously. I mean, we've already seen so many cis women that get accosted going to the quote unquote correct bathroom just because they don't look like a typical woman. So that's really how these bans will land. And just for our Marxists in the house, this is also like a profession. Like, you're literally putting a ban on people's jobs. And for a lot of queer people, especially trans performers who don't have the avenues and the opportunities to get quote unquote normal jobs, drag is their only means of sustaining themselves. And you are actively banning people from that.
Yeah. Benny, the actual route I think that these bigots are taking to erode basic fundamental rights from LGBTQ plus citizens is through healthcare. How important, I think, for all of us is it to enlist physicians and healthcare professionals to fight these efforts, not only to prevent disenfranchising trans and non-binary patients from care, but to kind of stop demonizing them in schools, in the workplace, in exam rooms, which essentially is a form of compromising their civil rights as well.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have healthcare providers be at the forefront of putting this message. I don't think it's gender affirming care. I think it's life affirming care. We know the statistics about, the suicide attempts and the suicide completions, right? And so we know that this is something that we have to take seriously, and depriving people healthcare, and then going, past that to enacting, violence towards them in, in every single way possible, whether it's active violence or whether it's neglecting, to give care, or just, misnaming them. It's at the end of the day, it's the lack of humanity is not conducive to healing, right? And healthcare is supposed to be about healing. It's about there's an oath that you take to do no harm, and so I take that oath very seriously, and I think healthcare professionals should be at the forefront to making sure that their patients feel valued, cared for, regardless of whatever identity they hold. Because people do not have to understand people in order for them to be humanized, right? Regardless, they deserve that their humanity.
So I'm going to throw up the actual map of all the gender affirming care bans that impact youth right now. All of the red states, as you could imagine, also the red states, where these laws have already been passed. And then the yellow states are the ones where it's under consideration, which, if you can't tell from the color coding, is a lot of states at this point. It feels like the laws are kind of taking off. And I think the dangerous kind of precedent that we alluded to is something that could impact so many other areas of life, especially for all of the Black people who are helping to get these things passed through their own bigotry. But Geoffrey, the last time we had you on our routine checkup show on Sirius XM, we went over some of these dangerous bills, particularly the ones related to healthcare. And, tell us, why should we be wary of the precedents that these actions are setting, not just for institutionalizing persecution of marginalized people again, but for the disappearing separation of church and state as well?
I think that precedent is a really good word to use. You know, in our country, the way our legal system is set up, everything is based on, you know, legal precedent. And by making space and validating these frankly bigoted legislation, we are truly allowing and opening the door. And I'm not saying we as in, you know, you and I, but societally, we, fascism. I know that that word is very strong. I know that word can feel very extreme. And frankly, that's because it is. And that's where we're at, kids. Like, I'm sorry to say, this is not the good timeline. And it's a decline. You know, I know so many people. I remember studying about World War II in middle school, and people were always like, well, how did it get that bad? How did that happen? How did we get from A to Z? And I'm like, babes, we're on M, like right now. We're like halfway there. That's what's at stake. And, you know, I think there is this tendency for marginalized people to be downplayed or like portrayed as like alarmist or extremist. I know many right-wing speakers that like to say that trans people are exaggerating when talking about genocide or extermination. That's simply not the case. How often is it that those in the margins are truly given the space and the recognition that they deserve, particularly when it comes to their well-being, their rights, and their overall sense of justice? You know, formally, it's supposed to be a separation of church and state, right? Like, that's what we're all taught. It's literally beat into our heads when we're in kindergarten, right after we do that whole, like, cult pledge allegiance thing. I'm not one who believes that the church is inherently bigoted, but I do believe that it is a very powerful vehicle, historically so and contemporarily so, for bigotry. There's a reason why that separation was like instituted into law. We can't govern a people by blind faith alone, let alone a country that has so many different walks of faith and faith that like is not existent at all. Yeah, we got to walk the walk. We really do.
Yeah. Benny, there are several studies that show the positive impact of gender affirming care. I think you were starting to kind of speak to that. How harmful are these efforts by lawmakers and the rhetoric around it in terms of, as you were saying, like the suicide rates and how gender affirming care really saves lives in a lot of cases?
I mean, it's very harmful. Language plays a crucial role in perpetuating white supremacy and the ideologies of white supremacy as it relates to how everyday people view trans people and non-binary people. And so, you know, using racist language, transphobic language, slurs, derogatory terms, stereotypes, really dehumanizes people, right? And it leads us to be okay with, you know, having violence directed at these people. And that's really what they want us to do. They want to slowly chip away at our tolerance for that kind of nonsense. And the more we accept it, the more we're okay turning a blind eye when, you know, trans people are getting killed, when trans people are being denied healthcare. And ultimately, we're saying, hey, it's not me, so why do I care? But the way, you know, collective liberation works is it's not you today, but tomorrow it is going to be you, right? So this is why we have to really take all of, you know, these acts of fascism, acts of, you know, dehumanization seriously and say, you know, it doesn't matter if it doesn't affect me today. You know, this is not okay. This is not the kind of world that I want to live in. And this is something that, you know, we all have to take a stand against.
It's honestly something that we debate a lot around hood medicine because, you know, I mean, being scientists, some of us, a lot of us being statisticians, we're looking at the patterns and the way that society has evolved over time. And we always have this debate about the bakers and the cabbies and the shoemakers and everything in Nazi Germany, and how actively the active resistance against fascism manifested in people's lives. Resisting fascism is an active pursuit. It's not something you can do passively. Do you know what I mean? And so it's otherwise you're complicit. Like silence is always complicity because it's affirming, you know, the status quo. And I think the more that we sink into this era, especially in the US, the more we have to kind of remind people of how we really feel about fascists and how things went poorly previously. Because, like you said, it's like one group today, but tomorrow it expands because there's always, in white supremacy, it's a pyramid, and we know what the pinnacle is. So if you're not a part of that, like, you don't have a seat at the table. There's not one coming to you, and there's really no benefit to, aiding and abetting fascism. It's not a good look, especially not in the future when people are looking back on the actions that we took or did not take in this time. But Geoffrey, honestly, like, as a co-founder of Black mental health organization, like, how have issues of race intersected with sort of the current climate, and how does that impact mental health within the queer community from your perspective?
I think as it relates to the like legislative climate, particularly with like these drag and by proxy like anti-trans bans, I mean, my immediate thought is like, how are these things going to be enforced, right? Law enforcement. And historically, when it comes to Black people and other people of color as well, law enforcement does not shake out too well for us. And that's definitely going to be exacerbated by queer Black people. I think of all of the Black trans artists and entertainers and women out there who are particularly vulnerable, not just from the arresting officer, but from the entire carceral system as a whole. How horrible would it be for some Black trans drag queen going to work, trying to get to the gig, being pulled over for breaking the law, and then being sent into a man's prison? Like, that's what does that serve? How does that help anyone when that's purely to punish? I think in terms of like its impact of like mental health broadly, again, I just want to echo what I said earlier in this radio segment. Living in a society and in a country and an entire governmental structure that truly is devoting energy to your annihilation is one of the most dismal things that you can do as a person. There's a constant weariness that just aggregates over time. I think that for queer Black people, in some ways, we already we're sort of born into our race, right? We ideally are born into like a family or an immediate circle of people like us, that look like us. Our Blackness, our racial identity formation, that sort of happens very naturally. But our queerness, it's a little different. Queerness is usually something that you grow into and that you sort of learn and discover about yourself as you age. And in that way, we're a bit more stratified. It's a bit harder to find that community and that sense of collectivism. And so when you exist as a minority within a minority group, that stratification is even more poignant, right? And so one thing that I really think and one thing I really hope is that my queer Black siblings, we find one another and we're able to rely upon each other. I think that's the only way to weather the storm as it relates to our mental health. We're the only ones that get it.
But what does that mean? What does that mean for providers, though? Is there enough? Do you think are there enough mental health providers who, that I guess one would trust, to be counselors and psychiatrists to queer people with mental health stressors?
Well, I would love to say yes, but in my current position in life, I would have to say no. I do think that is the unfortunate reality, and I'm gonna have to, target a little bit of fire to my own profession of choice, psychology and mental health as a whole. We're not ready. We're not, and that's just a fact. I think psychology is still trying to undo a lot of damages that has been done towards the queer community over the past 50 years. But I think as of right now, similar to people as a whole, we have a lot more visibility and conversations about oppression and privilege and power and identities. But when it comes to actually putting that into practice and what that actually means for being the authority figure and the healthcare provider in the room for someone that is of a completely different walk of life with you, I think unfortunately, I have to say that mental health care is a job. And just like many other professions, some people are bad at their jobs.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's like definitive, but I do think that's where we're at right now.
Vinny, can you add a little bit to the role of like community support and allyship in addressing some of these unmet mental health needs of queer, trans, and non-binary folks?
Absolutely. I was looking at a study done by the Trevor Project, and they showed that Black, transgender, and non-binary young people with high social support from their family had 47% lower odds of reporting a suicide attempt. And so it just shows you just how beneficial it is to have people in your life that actually care about you, that value you, and that are going to stick with you regardless of what you identify as, whatever identity you may hold. If they're willing to take that journey with you, that is a protective factor, right? And that's what we need, because as you were saying, like this kind of rhetoric that they're pushing, they want to make everybody your enemy. They want to make everybody hate you, right? And so they want to make sure that there are no safe spaces for anybody who exists within these identities, right? In fact, they want you to be violent towards them. And so that is, and so that's why we need to not only address the systemic issues, right, but also the communal factors, making sure that people in our community, right, because people say, oh, the whole agenda, they're pushing an agenda, this is about indoctrination of kids. No, this is really about making sure that your child humanizes, a trans or a non-binary individual and doesn't enact violence towards them, right? It's nothing about how we want them to interact with them, or we want them to become trans. There's no agenda like that at all, and that's the most ridiculous thing ever. We just want trans and non-binary people not to die, and we want to make sure that the community around them are treating them like people, and it's not that's not a hard thing to ask at all. That should be something that we should be committed to regardless of anybody's identity.
Geoffrey, like many of the healthcare bans and cultural laws, the supporters are giving really trash justifications for them that typically have to do with protecting the youth, as you were alluding to previously. I don't believe for a second that kids are top of mind for these lawmakers, because they seem to go out of their way to ignore any social benefit programming that could actually help many struggling and marginalized children in this country, or to enact actual laws around, statutory rape, around child marriage, child labor, for that matter, anything really. There's really not anything that we're doing for the kids.
Literally
but
anything
apparently
else.
This is for the kids. Right. First question, isn't this just another sort of morality mirage to call in like-minded bigots? I mean, let's keep it real.
Absolutely. And I kind of almost don't want to call it a morality mirage, because that's way too cunty of a name for how much of a flop this is. Like, literally, the way that, but what about the children? Think of the children. How do I explain to my child? That has been leveraged against queer people since the institution of this country, and it's tired. It's not only tired, but it's just not based in reality. I mean, as you've spoken to already, how many other initiatives as it relates to children, as it relates to our youth, the future of our human race, how many protections are we actually putting together in position for their own well-being? None. There are so many gun safety drills that children have to go through today. Like I'm only 26 years old. I'm not that old. I haven't been around that long. School was a way ago, but it wasn't that far away. We didn't have to do that. Okay. That's the context that our children are living in. That's what they need to be protected from. Healthcare, access to food, access to water, access to housing, access to education. Worry about that. That's the real danger. You know, this idea, again, that queer people are predators or groomers, as you know, that's the term, that's the cute one. This idea that queer people are a danger to children is an instant demonization, right? It instantly shuts down any discourse. It instantly reduces you from an actual human being, a well-rounded person, to some sort of menace, you know, a threat. And I guess in some sense, you're right. Queer people are a threat to the regressive, limited, strident heterosexism that's in place in this country. Yeah, I think that gets it.
Yeah. And ironically, we're not doing anything to try to cut down on actual trafficking predators. Like, there are so many.
There are, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What's often left out of this conversation about think about the children is like, let's think about queer children. Queer children exist, and you are actively making strides to hurt those children. I was a queer child. I was. And if I were growing up and going through my queer development in this day and age, that would be horrifying. I simply could not imagine. Queer children deserve to be protected. Again, we already grow up and come into our own in isolation so often. And to be so vulnerable and so hated and so feared from so many axes and so many areas and avenues of life. That's not the way things should be.
Yeah. It's crazy because we actually demonize rapists far less than they're trying to do trans people right now. Rapists can like either completely get off or never be charged or do their time and then return to society and live a full life. And they often do. And we don't demonize them half as much as we do trans citizens who should be full citizens with their full rights. Welcome to America. But yeah, that was the second question. It's like, what about the actual kids? Like the ones who are struggling with their own identities and wanting to explore and understand themselves, but are just seeing persecution in the world around them, especially with social media now and how intrinsic that is to children's lives. Geoffrey, like, what kind of mental health effect is that kind of having on youth who are just seeing their lives devalued more and more?
So one thing that broadly speaking, again, this idea of a constant state of stress and anxiety and depression, of knowing that you're living in a world that truly is not safe for you. I think that one area that this really, can cause some real damage is that because the culture is cultivating this, people feel empowered to regurgitate this interpersonally in their day-to-day lives, right? These children are going to school where they're being harassed, not only by their peers, but maybe even by the people they're supposed to trust and rely upon, the authority figures, their teachers, their administrators, and hopefully not, but maybe even their parents and family as well, right? So it's a constant sources of negativity surrounding them. I think in the sense of not being able to access the care, particularly healthcare that you need, can obviously be detrimental. I think for queer youth in particular, there's this terrifying fear of hitting puberty and not being able to start that change as you are or as you believe you should be, right? It's a very daunting idea. And I think that shows a lot in queer adults. There's sort of this in-joke that, queer people go through second puberty in their 20s. And it's because they weren't afforded that free, liberating, open, expansive experience that puberty is supposed to be in your teen years. Because we most often are not afforded that privilege. people have had to fight very hard and very long to have the scraps of joy and liberation that we've been able to receive over the past couple of years. And I don't want to say that we've taken that for granted, but clearly we're being shown how tenuous those joys and liberties were.
Yeah. Yeah. Like freedom is like super precarious right about now. Once again, Benny, for that matter, like the way that these laws have been written in terms of like the vigilantism they've authorized, particularly for kids, in so many of these states, they encourage students and teachers to sort of turn against queer and trans students. There's already concerns around school officials being able to out kids if they find out that they are trying to pass as the wrong gender, quote unquote, as well as penalties for families seeking care, either in state or out of state where it's banned. Um, what are sort of the mental health implications of stripping these kids of all the safe spaces they should be able to enjoy as children?
Oh man, I mean, first of all, let's speak to the extension of the police state, right?
Ugh, we don't have time. That's like a whole nother show, but go ahead. Go
but
ahead.
they're essentially making their peers and their teachers an extension of the police state, right? So that they're surveilling them and making sure, oh, if you're not appropriate to what we deem is appropriate, right? Then you and your parents can potentially be arrested, kicked out of school, and any number of horrible consequences, right? And then the police state going into the prison industrial complex, and then we talk about the incarceration of black families, right? The disproportionate incarceration of black families, breaking up black families, all due to what? Seeking gender affirming care, or because the children are queer. This is another tool of white supremacy to dismantle, to disrupt, to harm black families, to black children, and ultimately, it's easy to get other people on board when you can indoctrinate people into this hate by giving them a little bit of power, by giving them a little bit of glory of, oh, like you're helping us do X, Y, Z, and it's an awful way of, just creating bullies in
Yeah.
school. That's really all that these policies are doing. We're creating bullies that are going to grow up to, hold up other systems of oppression that are, going to, in the future, create much more damaging policies, procedures, and initiatives. So it's not looking good, because when you have young people being indoctrinated to these kinds of hatred this young, this is the next generation of people upholding the systems of oppression. So this is very concerning and very damaging to the mental health of queer individuals.
What do you guys think about kind of, how it feeds into the frenzy of fascism and the propaganda that we're hearing um, in terms of that, pitting neighbor against neighbor aspect? Because you have like Geoffrey was saying, you have this marginalized group within a marginalized group. We already know like how much like racial trauma we can all walk around carrying every day. And then you have this sort of intersectional aspect where you have that compounded with homophobic and transphobic trauma. And then it, not unlike the other bans, book bans, abortion bans, etc. Now you're also wary of strangers, neighbors, just the people in your lives, and the way that they're starting to write laws that go back to the days when they could deputize citizens, lynch mobs, all those things to kind of help, like you said, the state persecute people that they deem undesirable. Like, what do you guys kind of think about what that says about our society? Benny, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, the black liberation is not possible without collective action, and they're trying to dismantle collective action by pitting us against each other, and by making sure that we don't have a collective agenda. So I think that's one of the biggest things. Another thing is I want to in the fight for Black liberation, we like the role that Black queers have played, or Black queers, Black women, all the intersectional identities, right? The most oppressed have done the most to advance the cause for Black liberation, although it's mostly benefited Black men because of the systems of patriarchy that we know exist, right? And so, even looking at that lens, they essentially want to turn us against each other, right? And then make sure that the people who are always at the forefront doing, all the work are not being taken care of by the community. So if they're not taken care of by the community, like how are we going to advance the cause that we do when they're the ones at the front lines all the time? And this is another thing that I always see and I want to like address, because we need more Black men at the forefront in these front lines to put themselves on the line for Black queer people, for Black women, right? Because it's not okay that they're out there advocating for us, but Black men are silent, or we're picking and choosing when we want to speak out, right? Because all Black people, we should be speaking out for all Black people. It shouldn't be, oh, I identify with their politics because they're Black Christians or Black men, or any of the identity positionalities that we prefer. So that's kind of what came to my mind.
Geoffrey, what do you think about us backsliding into authoritarianism?
I think that authoritarianism and by extension fascism requires a scapegoat. It requires a monster that the authoritarian force rallies up everyone to fall in line against. And queer people, I think specifically trans people, have become a very convenient and very vulnerable target. I think that because of the way race and the civil rights movement has been codified in the US, it's a lot harder to, we still have to use dog whistles when we talk about race, but as we're seeing right now, we are post dog whistle as it relates to trans people. We straight up just call them pedophiles. And I'm sorry if you get like demonetized for that. But yeah, that's where we're at. And I think that queer people are the target right now. That's how we're allowing this descent into fascism to play out. I think that what we really have to do is, one, liberals need to stand up. The sort of hand holding, everyone say kumbaya sort of thing is just not giving. It's not working. We need to be decisive. We need to stand truly with the people that we say we invest in and represent. I also believe that at a certain point, we have to codify transphobia as being unacceptable. And I don't think that's where we're at in our current society. I think that we have had a visibility of trans people. I think 2014 was like the year of the transgender tipping point or whatever. That's almost 10 years ago. And look at us now. Transphobia can no longer just be a social faux pas. It needs to be seen and treated as a system of oppression that it is.
Yeah, it's discouraging, I think, to me, because I mean, I don't know when we decided that, taking on the tactics of our oppressors to turn around and oppress our own people was an acceptable route to, civil rights and fighting for racial justice. But I, increasingly see a lot of people sort of vocalize those things, always around like morality and their religion, which if it's the same religion that, I learned about and was raised in, I'm pretty sure the only call was to love one another. And that doesn't seem like that's something that's ever been, typified in this country. I don't think, as much as they are trying to erode the separation between church and state and to like make laws that are increasingly like falling on the side of you know, allowing religion to have a larger role in policymaking and certainly in the cultural wars in this country. Um, I think it's really unfortunate that people who are so-called Christians don't understand the very, very, very simplified calling of Jesus Christ in the first place. And I'm not sure what I believe anymore, but I am really hoping that he does come back and start kicking some tables over, because this is a mess. But it is Juneteenth, and we do want to talk about that liberation and freedom aspect. And so I guess just in terms of finding that joy and finding, your purpose and kind of moving forward to do what we can for each other. Um, what, I guess I'll start with you, Geoffrey. What do you think about like how people can begin to find, help and support if they're struggling, especially with their mental health? And how do you think, you know, how do you find joy and I guess in resistance?
I would have to say three different things. One, safety, and I mean safety in the sense of uh, truly just operating in ways that you will be conducive to your own safety and security, but also prioritizing your self-care. I know that term is tired. I know it's played out, but what I truly do mean that prioritize your self-care. You got to take care of this vessel because it's the only one we got. Community, find people that you really vibe with and that you can be your true authentic self with. And also find people that can, if you so choose, organize with you, or at the very least are working towards the same ideals and causes and the betterment of the people that you believe in. And to this last point of authenticity, people that know me well know that that's one of the principles that I try to live by throughout my life. It means a lot to me. It's taken a very long time for me to congeal into the magnificent being that you see before you. And I try to bring that presence to all aspects of my life. It's really, really important for people, especially queer people. I'm talking to you right now, and especially our Black queer siblings. You are far more powerful than any other person out here, okay? So don't let them stop you. They could literally never. So embrace who you are and be who you are. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You're way too good for that. So that's what I would have to say.
I love that. What about
Put
you,
that on
Benny?
put that on my morning affirmations list. Just
Right?
pray. I love that.
What about you, Benny? Like, where do you find the joy?
Where do I find the joy? I find joy in seeing young people and their readiness for change and their willingness to advocate for one another. This generation is just there's something else, and I love how they are ready to make things happen at an instant. I also find joy from resting. Rest is resistance itself. We live in a capitalistic society where we base our worth based on how much we do, based on working ourselves to death, and we have to reclaim our time and we have to rest. And so there's a lot of joy I get from that. I get joy from being in community with beautiful people like you two, and just people who I can be my authentic self with. Um, that's one of the most powerful things to me because I completely agree with Geoffrey. The people that you have around you, your environment dictates your mental health. People don't know that, but your environment really dictates most of your mental health. And so that's your internal environment, your mindset, but also your external environment, the people you're around, whether it's your family, your friends, the people that you work with. And so if you got people that are constantly bringing you down and you got to stay around them, that's going to slowly wear and tear at you and it's going to impact your mental health. So As much as you can, get people who make you feel amazing, who will call you out and hold you accountable out of in love, right? And those are the people that bring me joy and that make me, be the best version of myself, so that I can do all that I can for my community. So that's really what brings me joy this Juneteenth, and I'm happy to be here with you all. You two bring me joy as well. So.
Oh, thank you. Geoffrey just said Chrome is anti-black because it just kicked me off the live stream. It is. Chrome is anti-black. Before we close, I'd love to get final thoughts from each of you, and just, to speak to the importance of allyship within our communities if we are fighting for collective liberation, and what that means, truly, because like I said, resistance is an active pursuit. It's not passive. Geoffrey, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, to the point of allyship and spreading joy, one thing that I am really happy to platform is that I have another sort of speaking engagement about transness and psychoanalysis on July 24th. So people can
Yay.
tune into that via Zoom. And for anyone located in DC, I actually have a show hosted by the wonderful House of What. It's at Songbird Music House this Friday at 11 p.m. So please come on down and see some Black queer joy.
And you, Benny?
Allyship is, for me, it's centering the most impacted people, hearing, and highlighting their voices, hearing them out, and then figuring out where your role is moving forward. So it's not trying to be the hero, but figuring out what role do I play adjacent to the people who should be centered. So that, and I will also do a little. In the future, the 21st and 22nd of July, we got a mental health conference in which we'll be featuring a lot of people with both lived experience and, academic experience in the fields of, health justice and mental health. We're definitely going to have a panel on, the mental health of LGBTQ people, queer people in general, and, the health disparities that relates to that community. So that's going to be an exciting talk as we push for, expanding Medicaid in Tennessee and highlighting the health disparities that exist in, our country, and making sure that people know that these health disparities exist due to racism, not due to biological differences or any, undeservingness or, whatever phrenology kind of fake science that they'll create. It's really due to the health disparity, due to the the social determinants of health, the underfunding of our communities because we keep funding police, right? And so we really just want to push for healthcare institutions. We want to push for our community to invest in us, in our livelihoods, and that's what we'll be doing. Catch us on the 21st, 22nd. It'll be on Zoom, or if you're in Nashville, it'll be at the Avon Williams Center.
Cool.
Thank you so much. I see all the BMHV links. Much love to you.
Yeah, definitely check them out at Black Mental Health Village, which is bmhv.org. I hope I said that in the right order.
Yep.
And then why don't you go ahead and give everybody your socials so they can follow you? Geoffrey, you want to go?
Yeah, please follow me on Instagram. It is sin.claire.x_x. And you can also find me on Twitch sometimes when I get that set up. That'll be also Sinclair X_X with no periods. Yes, please check out my Instagram for all of the other wonderful things I'll be doing over the summer.
And what about you, Benny? Where can we follow you?
All right. My Instagram is BennyE7. or you can catch the Black Mental Health Village. All of our thing ends with BMH Village, BMH VILLAGE. So follow us on Insta, Twitter, Facebook, all the things.
And we drop those links in the chat if anyone wants to follow up and donate to that org, which is doing great work in the mental health space. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Let's Get Vaccinated on Hood Med Chats, hosted with our friends from March for Science. At Hood Medicine, we bring you real talk and mad science to help you make the right decisions to keep your loved ones safe. Please follow us on Facebook, Insta, Twitter, support our effort, donate to our cause, or find out about our next events. You can visit hoodmed.org to find us on social media at hood_medicine. And you can also support us through our Bonfire merch shop at our Gorilla Gear store at bonfire.com. And also be sure to listen to our expert scientists, physicians, hackers, and assorted geeks on Routine Checkup with Hood Medicine every Monday morning at 11 a.m. EST on the Lurie Daniel Favor Show. And that's on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126. And thank you again for joining us. Everyone stay safe and get vaccinated. Thank you.
Hey, love it.